While driving down the road one night, I was hit with a foul odor. It seemed to be coming from everywhere. It evoked memories of driving past a hog farm. Even still, this noxious odor was so putrid that I was on the verge of violently vomiting out my own internal organs. I lit a cigarette in a futile attempt to mask the smell, but for some reason the scent of burning menthol tobacco only made it worse. I pressed a little harder on the accelerator in a pathetic attempt to outrun the miasma of what was surrounding me. Moments later, I lost 2 tires to a piece of scrap metal in the middle of the road. With my 2 front tires shredding, I didn't steer so much as I slid into the scene of the crash. Of all the places on the 2-lane road that I could have crashed, I ended up wrapping the front end of my '99 Ford Taurus around a concrete guardrail. The seatbelt saved me from slamming into the steering column, but it still cut into my flesh. The stinging pain and sight of windshield glass flying forward was almost enough to distract me from that god-awful smell. Even as time slowed to a crawl and the contents of my otherwise cluttered back seat flew towards the front, I couldn't help but retch as the overpowering scent assaulted my nose through the gaping hole in the windshield that had been my only protection from the unholy fumes. It was February. If I had to guess, it was around 10 degrees Fahrenheit with a violent wind chill to match it. My windows had shattered, I was bleeding, I only had 1 spare tire. Not that a new tire would have done me any good. My car had folded up along the edge of the bridge like it had been made out of paper mache. Aside from some general soreness and a cut across my chest, I was okay. I pulled my jacket and gloves from the wreckage as I stood by the wreckage. I searched the car for my phone to no avail. It had been resting on the dashboard, no phone, no car, and 10 miles from the nearest town. I was left alone with the miasma that was creeping back into my conscious mind as the trauma of the wreck left the forefront. There was no moon in the sky. The only light available to me came from the tail lights. Faced with little in the way of options, I pulled some road flares from the trunk and placed them around the wreckage. I used the last flare and some kindling gathered from the edge of the woods to build a fire. It wasn't much, but it was just good enough to keep me warm. It also helped keep the smell at bay for a while. At some point, I fell asleep next to my makeshift campfire. I woke to the faint sound of my phone ringing. As I slept under my leather trench coat, it had snowed. The white flakes were still falling as I startled awake. The fire had been reduced to glowing embers that sizzled as snowflakes landed on them. I was chilled to the bone. Even still, I shot to my feet and wrapped myself in my trench coat as I marched towards the sound of my ringing phone. In the deep blue light of the morning, I could see the white light of my phone glistening along the banks of the creek below the bridge. I stumbled toward it. I pulled the small device into my hands. It had stopped ringing. The screen had cracked, and my fingers were all but too numb to work the small touchscreen. I pressed the emergency call button and fell to my knees shouting as I watched a notification scroll across the top of the screen. No service. Kneeling at the bank of the creek, I looked up to see a terrible sight before me. Not 1, or even 3, but 13 bodies hanging from the bottom of the bridge in various states of decay. Each one had been hanged by a noose and left to rot. Some of them looked as if they had been there for months. A gentle wind blew under the bridge, and That caused the bodies to sway. One by one, their eyes began to open. Desiccated arms reached toward me, or began clawing at the ropes that bound them in place. I tried to stand and stumbled backward. My phone flew from my hand and shot into the water. I crawled on my hands and knees towards the road before gaining some footing and shooting up the bank and toward my car. The scent was carried by the wind. The cold air had lessened it slightly, but know that I was breathing the particles of death and decay that escaped the macabre scene sickened me to my core. A green sign next to the bridge read, Cogar Creek. I heard the rumble of an engine in the distance. Slowly the yellow headlight came around the bend. It was a beat-up old Chevy pickup truck. It slowed down as it approached the crash. An elderly man in a Carahat jacket rolled up down his window and said, "You're gonna catch a death if you stay out here, son. Need a ride?" I climbed into the truck and closed the door and said, "Thank you so very much. You just saved my life." I heard the distinct sound of a hammer being pulled back on a revolver. That old man smiled a toothless grin and laughed as he said, "Now I wouldn't take it that far, son. You didn't happen to go under that bridge now, did you?" The look of fear in my eye said it all. He smirked and said, "Show me your hand, boy." I extended my hand. It was still pale and red from the cold. With the swiftness of a much younger man, he pulled a knife and slashed it across my hand in one fluid motion. I pulled my hand back and he said, "Show me your hand, boy." He looked down at his gun and then back up at me. I extended my hand again and he pushed the hammer back on the gun. My hand was bleeding profusely. He handed me a handkerchief and said, "Sorry, son. Had to make sure. The dead ones don't bleed." I shot back, "What the hell are you talking about?" He put the truck into gear and slowly pulled away. As we were moving down the road, he said, "My boy put those things down there. Only place we could think to put them. Otherwise, they just wander around." I stared out the windshield and asked, "What are they?" The old man simply said, "Don't suppose anybody knows. My granddaddy told me stories about the dead of Cogar Creek. I guess they've always been like that." As we moved further away from the bridge, the stench began to dissipate. The old man took me into town, and from there I was able to get to a hospital. Later that day, a tow truck arrived to fetch my car. I had mentioned the bodies to the police. An officer would later tell me that they had recovered 7 bodies from below the bridge at Cogar Creek. 7?